My paralegal best friend pulled the bank subpoenas. My accountant cousin traced $38,000 straight to his wife's LLC. I filed in Jefferson County Circuit Court. The judge ordered full restitution plus $22,000 in punitive damages. They had to sell the lake house to pay me back. On the morning of my 30th birthday, I drove to First Heritage Bank on Bardstown Road in Louisville with a folder of documents, a copy of my grandmother's trust, and a heart full of gratitude for the woman who had made sure I'd be okay. I sat down across from the trust officer, slid my ID over the desk, and said I was ready to claim my inheritance. She pulled up the account, went quiet for a long moment, then turned the screen toward me. The balance read $2,140.37. My grandmother had left me $147,300. I need to go back. My name is Cassie. I'm 31 now. I'm a veterinary technician in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is the story of how my uncle stole my inheritance and lost everything trying to keep it. I grew up in Shelbyville, about 30 miles east of Louisville. My mother struggled with addiction for most of my childhood, so I was raised mostly by my grandmother, Eleanor. She was a retired school librarian, frugal, principled, the kind of woman who balanced her checkbook every Sunday morning and could tell you the exact price of milk at 3 different grocery stores. In 2014, she sold her farmhouse on Route 53 and placed the proceeds into a trust account for me. $147,300. She named her eldest son, my Uncle Roy, as trustee until I turned 30. I put myself through veterinary technician school at Jefferson Community and Technical College. I worked nights at a Thornton's gas station to pay for it, studied in the break room between customers, slept 4 hours a night for 2 years. Eleanor came to my graduation in a wheelchair. She was already sick by then, pancreatic cancer. She held my hand and said, "You did this yourself, Cassie. Don't ever let anyone tell you it was easy." 6 months later, she was gone. Uncle Roy was 58, Eleanor's firstborn, the golden child. He managed a car dealership out in Jeffersontown and carried himself like he was running a Fortune 500 company. Firm handshake, pressed shirts, always talking about the market, like he had a seat on Wall Street instead of a desk next to the service bay. His wife, Denise, had cycled through business ventures the way other people cycle through hobbies. A photography studio that lasted 8 months, a meal prep service that never turned a profit, and most recently, a luxury candle line called Denise Luxe Aromatics. Roy always talked down to me. He called vet work cute. He called my apartment in the Highlands plain house. At Thanksgiving one year, he told his buddy on the phone that I cleaned up after dogs for a living. I tolerated it because Eleanor had asked the family to stay close, because she believed in loyalty even when people didn't earn it, and because after she died, Roy looked me in the eye and said, "Don't worry about the trust, Cassie. It's growing nicely. Just focus on your life and I'll take care of it until you're 30. I trusted him. He was family. But in the 2 years before my 30th birthday, I started noticing things. Roy and Denise suddenly renovated their lake house out at Taylorsville Lake, the same lake house they'd called a money pit for years. New dock, new kitchen, heated floors in the bathroom. Denise's candle business had a flashy website and a booth at the St. James Court Art Show, but I never saw a single customer mention it online. Not one review, not one repost. Roy bought a new Tahoe and started talking about early retirement at 58. At family gatherings, whenever I mentioned the trust or my future plans for the money, maybe a down payment on a house, maybe opening a small animal rescue, Roy would change the subject fast. "Don't count your chickens," he'd say with a tight smile. Then Denise would pour more wine and start talking about her new candle scents. Bourbon vanilla, bluegrass cedar, names that sounded expensive and smelled like a Bath and Body Works clearance shelf. I didn't connect the dots. I should have. But when someone you love tells you not to worry, you want to believe them. You want to believe that the person your grandmother trusted with your future actually honored that trust. I wanted to believe that so badly, I ignored every red flag Roy hung right in front of my face. So there I was, sitting in First Heritage Bank on the morning of my 30th birthday, staring at a number that made no sense. $2,140 out of $147,000. I stared at that screen for so long, the trust officer asked if I needed water. Then I asked her to print every single transaction from the last 6 years. And what came out of that printer changed everything. I took those 41 pages of transaction history to a Panera on Hurstburn Lane and spread them across a booth table like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what they were. The withdrawals started small. $1,200 in June 2019, labeled trust maintenance fees. $800 in September, labeled administrative costs. Then they grew. $5,000 in March 2020, $12,000 in August 2021, and then the one that made my vision blur. $18,500 in a single wire transfer in January 2023, sent directly to an LLC called Denise Lux Aromatics, Denise's Candle Company. My grandmother's money poured into bourbon-scented wax and a website nobody visited. The pattern was unmistakable. Roy had been draining the account methodically for 6 years, and the withdrawals got bigger as my 30th birthday got closer. Like he was racing a clock. Like he knew the moment I turned 30 and walked into that bank, the game was over. So he took as much as he could, as fast as he could, and hoped I'd be too stupid or too grateful to ask questions. I sat in my car in that Panera parking lot and called my best friend Lee. I was sobbing so hard she could barely understand me. Lee was a paralegal at a litigation firm downtown. She'd seen cases like this. She told me to breathe. Then she told me not to confront Roy. Don't tip him off. We build the case first. But I couldn't wait. The next weekend was my cousin Tyler's 4th of July barbecue at Roy's house in Jeffersontown. Everybody would be there. Roy would be standing at his grill in his apron, holding court like he always did. And I would have to look at his face, knowing what he'd done. I couldn't sit on it. I told Lee I was going. She said, "Cassie, please don't." I went anyway. The barbecue was the same as every year. Folding tables in the backyard, kids running through the sprinkler, Denise walking around with a tray of deviled eggs and that same plastic smile she wore like armor. Roy was at the grill flipping burgers, telling Tyler about some truck he'd just sold at the dealership. I stood by the cooler and waited until there was a gap in the conversation. Then I said it. "Hey, Uncle Roy, I went to the bank on my birthday to claim Grandma's trust. Can you explain why the account only had $2,000 in it?" He didn't look up. He flipped a burger and said, "There were fees, Cassie. Management fees. You wouldn't understand. It's financial stuff." 41 pages of fees, I said, including an $18,500 wire transfer to Denise's Candle Company? He turned then. His face went red from the jaw up, like someone had poured hot water over him. He set the spatula down on the side of the grill and looked at me the way he always looked at me. Like I was small. Like I didn't matter. "Your grandmother would have wanted me to have it," he said. "You're just a girl who plays with animals." Denise stepped in fast, the way she always did when Roy needed cover. "Honey, Eleanor always said Roy should manage the family finances. She trusted him. Maybe you should too." I looked at her. She trusted him to manage it for me, not steal it. The backyard went silent. Tyler set down his plate. Aunt Patty looked at her shoes. The kids stopped running. Nobody said a word. Not one person in that yard opened their mouth to defend me. Roy picked up his spatula and pointed it at me like a finger. He said I should be grateful he kept the money in the family instead of letting me blow it on some stray dog shelter. Grateful for being robbed. I left without another word. I walked through the side gate and sat in my car in the driveway with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I texted Lee 3 words. Build the case. She cleared her entire Saturday. She came to my apartment with a legal pad and a laptop and sat cross-legged on my living room floor. She explained the process. We needed bank subpoenas, transfer records, Roy's financial disclosures as trustee, the original trust document. Lee's firm handled estate litigation. She knew exactly which Jefferson County judges took fiduciary fraud seriously and which ones would let a guy like Roy charm his way through a hearing. He called your job playing with animals, Lee said, uncapping a pen. She looked up at me with the kind of steady, quiet anger that doesn't burn out. Let's show him what your unimportant friends can do. Within 72 hours, Lee had filed the subpoena requests, and what the banks sent back was worse than anything I'd imagined. The bank subpoenas came back on a Thursday. 67 separate withdrawals over 6 years, totaling $145,160. That left the $2,140 I'd found sitting in that account like a joke. Roy hadn't just skimmed, he'd gutted it, methodically, every few weeks, sometimes every few days, pulling money out of an account that was supposed to be mine and spending it like it was his. My cousin Marcus called me that same night. Marcus was 34, an accountant at a firm in Lexington. We'd never been especially close, but when he heard what Roy had done, he volunteered immediately. He said he'd reconstruct every single transaction on his own time. He meant it. Marcus worked nights and weekends for 3 straight weeks, pulling corporate filings from the Kentucky Secretary of State, cross-referencing Denise's LLC bank statements, mapping every withdrawal to its destination. What he found was worse than I thought. $38,000 went directly to Denise Lux Aromatics, Denise's candle company. That LLC never turned a profit, not 1 quarter. It dissolved quietly in 2024 with nothing to show for it but a dead website and a storage unit full of unsold inventory. Another $47,000 went to a contractor in Shelby County for the Taylorsville Lake House renovation. New dock, kitchen remodel, outdoor fireplace. Marcus found a Zillow listing for the property that time-stamped the improvements to the exact months of the largest withdrawals. $26,000 in cash withdrawals had no documentation whatsoever. No receipts, no invoices, nothing. Marcus flagged those as the most damning because a trustee is legally required to account for every dollar. And Roy never filed a single annual trust accounting with the court, which Kentucky law requires. He just didn't do it, and nobody checked. Roy found out I'd pulled records. I don't know who told him. Maybe someone at the bank, maybe Aunt Patty. But within days, he sent a group text to Aunt Patty, Uncle Gene, cousins Tyler and Brooke, and me. He called me ungrateful. He claimed Eleanor had verbally told him the money was flexible and he could use it for family needs. No written evidence, no witnesses, just Roy's word against a dead woman's trust document. Denise posted a passive-aggressive Facebook status that night. Some people don't understand that family takes care of family. Sad when the younger generation only cares about money. She got 40 likes from extended family. 40 people clicking a little thumbs up while my grandmother's savings sat in Denise's candle wax. Aunt Patty called me privately. She begged me to let it go for the family's sake. I asked her if she knew. There was a long silence. Then she said, Roy said he was handling it. Uncle Gene sent a 1-line text. Don't embarrass us. I stared at that text for 10 minutes. Don't embarrass us. Not don't steal from your niece. Not how could Roy do this. Don't embarrass us. Roy hired an attorney, a golf buddy from the dealership. The guy sent me a cease and desist letter claiming interfamily financial arrangements were not subject to civil litigation. Lee read it at my kitchen table and laughed so hard she almost knocked over her coffee. "This isn't even a real legal argument," she said. "This is a guy who passed the bar and never opened a book again." We met at a coffee shop on Frankfurt Avenue. Me, Lee, and Marcus. We laid out the plan. File a civil suit in Jefferson County Circuit Court for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and fraud. Simultaneously report Roy to the Kentucky Attorney General's office, which has a dedicated fiduciary fraud unit. Marcus had his forensic accounting report ready. 34 pages. Every withdrawal mapped to its destination. Every missing receipt highlighted in red. Lee connected me with an estate litigation attorney at her firm named David Osai. He reviewed Marcus's report for about 20 minutes, flipping pages slowly, then looked up and said, "This isn't even close. This is textbook." He took the case on a partial contingency. Marcus had his own grudge. Roy once told him accounting was just adding numbers and refused to let him review Eleanor's estate during probate. He thought none of us would ever look, Marcus told me the night we filed. That was his biggest mistake. The Attorney General's office called me on a Tuesday morning. They'd opened a formal investigation, and Roy had just been served at his dealership in front of his coworkers. The case went before Judge Lorraine Whitfield in Jefferson County Circuit Court on a Wednesday morning in October. Roy showed up in a suit I'd never seen him wear. Denise sat in the gallery with her hands folded like she was at church. Aunt Patty was 2 rows behind her, staring straight ahead. Roy's golf buddy attorney tried 3 defenses. First, that Eleanor had given verbal permission for Roy to use the funds. Second, that the withdrawals were loans Roy intended to repay. Third, that I suffered no real harm because I didn't even know the money existed day to day. David Osai dismantled each one like he was taking apart a cheap engine. He presented Marcus's forensic report, the bank subpoenas, the Denise Lux LLC filings showing 0 profit and a quiet dissolution, the contractor invoices for the lake house renovation. He called a trust law professor from the University of Louisville as an expert witness who looked at the judge and said, "This represents one of the most clear-cut cases of fiduciary breach I've reviewed in 20 years of practice." Then Roy took the stand. He was sweating through his collar. David let him talk for a while. Let him repeat his lines about family and flexibility and how Eleanor would have understood. Then David asked him one question. "Mr. Harlan, can you produce any written authorization from Eleanor Harlan permitting you to withdraw funds from this trust for personal use?" Roy stammered. His attorney objected. Judge Whitfield overruled. Roy sat there for what felt like a full minute. Then he said, "She would have understood." David turned to the judge. "That's a no, Your Honor." Denise started crying in the gallery, not out of remorse. She leaned over to Aunt Patty and whispered loud enough for half the courtroom to hear that this whole thing is Cassie being vindictive. Judge Whitfield looked at her with an expression that could strip paint off a barn door. Denise went quiet after that. The ruling came down the same afternoon. Full restitution of $145,160 plus $22,000 in punitive damages for willful misconduct. Roy and Denise were ordered to pay within 120 days. The Attorney General's investigation remained open for potential criminal charges. They had to sell the lake house, the one at Taylorsville Lake with the new dock and the kitchen remodel and the heated bathroom floors. The house my grandmother's money built. It sold for $189,000. Roy's reputation at the dealership was finished. They quietly moved him from sales manager to a back office role where he didn't talk to customers anymore. Denise deleted all her social media. Every account. Gone overnight. Aunt Patty sent me a card in the mail that said, "I'm sorry," with no further explanation. No phone call, no visit, just a card. Uncle Gene never spoke to me again. I considered that a net positive. 3 weeks after the ruling, my cousin Tyler called. He was quiet for a long time on the other end. Then he said, "I should have said something at the barbecue. I knew something was off. We all did. I just didn't want to believe it." I told him I didn't need an apology from him. I needed him to stop pretending the family was ever functional. He asked if we could get lunch. I said maybe. We eventually did. It was awkward, but honest. It was a start. I used $30,000 of the recovered funds as a down payment on a small house in the Germantown neighborhood of Louisville. 3 bedrooms, fenced yard, room for my 2 rescue dogs to run. I set aside $40,000 and established the Eleanor Harlan Emergency Veterinary Fund through my clinic. It covers emergency treatment for animals whose owners can't afford it. The first patient treated under the fund was a hit-by-car stray tabby cat with a broken pelvis and a will to live that reminded me of my grandmother. The staff named him Judge. Marcus got a promotion at his firm, partly on the strength of the forensic work he did on the case. Lee got a bottle of Woodford Reserve and a handwritten letter from me that made her cry at her desk. My uncle thought I was just a girl who played with animals, that my friends were nobodies, that my job was a joke, that I'd never have the brains or the backbone to catch him. He bet everything on me being small. But my grandmother didn't raise me to be small. She raised me to be precise. And precise people keep receipts. The money's back where it belongs now. Not in my pocket, but in her name, saving lives she'd have wanted saved. That's the inheritance Roy could never steal.